I knew I was officially a relic the moment Harper chuckled and said I was too old for cloud in front of the entire leadership table. It wasn't just the words, it was the way they hit, light and condescending, wrapped in a tone that said she thought she was being cute. The others laughed, of course. Not a belly laugh, nothing brave like that. Just the kind of stifled chuckles people do when someone with power makes a shitty joke and you don't want to be the one who doesn't laugh. I didn't flinch, I didn't even blink. I just slowly folded the edge of my notebook over the small diagram I'd been sketching, one they wouldn't understand even if I taped it to their foreheads, and set my pen down. That's the thing about being the last veteran in a room full of startups in suits. You become decor. A nostalgic callback to when the company still had a server room and engineers who used whiteboards instead of Canva. You become ornamental. And today, they made that official by naming Harper, the founder's daughter and a woman who once asked me what a VPN was. VP of Cloud Strategy. Now, before we go further, I have to ask. If you're enjoying this story and want more like it, do us a solid, hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of you listening don't subscribe, and it really helps the team keep these stories going. Appreciate it. The room smelled like fake leather and coffee that had been reheated one too many times. We were tucked into some overpriced off-site lodge that looked like Pinterest had vomited on a ski cabin. Harper stood at the head of the table, blonde curls bouncing as she clicked through slides filled with gradients and words like cloud-first synergy and zero downtime architecture. It was a performance, not a plan. Her title had been announced that morning, casually, like it was no big deal. The founder grinned like a proud dad, and maybe he was, depending how you define nepotism, and made some quip about fresh leadership for a fresh era. I sat there chewing the inside of my cheek and pretending not to hear the unspoken message. Rachel, your era's over. I'm not bitter. I've been in this game too long to be surprised when experience loses to enthusiasm in a shiny deck. But what got me wasn't the appointment, it was the erasure. Not once did anyone mention the existing stack, the layered-on dependencies, the physical systems we still hadn't decoupled. Not once did they ask who built the architecture they now wanted to replace with a marketing campaign. Harper's roadmap was as pretty as it was dangerous. I could already see the cracks before she finished her first bullet point. Archive sync pipelines planned to run after the bridge servers were phased out. Legacy security exceptions she didn't even know existed. Everything they wanted to sunset had at least 2 buried dependencies that were still in active use across critical clients. But she didn't know, and she didn't ask. I had 2 options: speak up and be the angry old lady in the room, or stay silent and let the proof write itself. So I stayed silent. Harper ended her presentation with a cheesy quote about boldness in the face of change. Everyone clapped. Someone next to me murmured something about how exciting it was to move beyond the old guard. I glanced at the coffee stain forming a ring under my mug and added a small arrow to my drawing, marking where the archive sync would collapse if the decommission went ahead as scheduled. And then I folded the page, slid my pen into the spiral, and watched the future sprint toward a wall at full speed. Let them laugh. Let them call me a fossil. The thing about fossils is they're the only reason we know how civilizations ended. The slides hit my inbox at 7:03 a.m., a full deck of color-coded optimism, freshly churned from whatever design agency Harper had on speed dial. Subject line, Strategic Cloud Migration Roadmap V4, Final. I opened it, half out of habit, half out of a twitch in my gut that hadn't relaxed since she dropped that too old for cloud line. The first few slides were harmless, buzzword salads dressed with acronyms, but then I got to the scheduling timeline. That's when the nausea kicked in. They were planning to decommission Bridge Server 7B on May 3rd. I blinked, checked again. May 3rd. That was the failover bridge for the entire archival sync pipeline. Without it, Client Alpha's cold storage transfers would break. Not hypothetically, not maybe, would. We'd written the entire middleware layer with that sequence in mind. Bridge first, then sync, then archive dump, then finally decom. It wasn't some theory tucked away in an obsolete README file. It was a known, flagged dependency. It was also apparently invisible to everyone now in charge. I scrolled further. The dependency chart was missing. There was no mention of sync latency, no buffer time between phases, and absolutely no plan for rollback. They were treating the whole thing like a SaaS plug-and-play migration instead of a live dissection of a 10-year-old hybrid system built by 5 different teams under 3 different CTOs. I closed the deck, opened my email, and typed carefully. Noticed a potential sequencing issue with Bridge Server 7B and the archival sync phase. Please confirm whether decoupling will occur prior to May 3rd decommission. Can provide dependencies if needed. It wasn't angry, wasn't even firm. I knew how to sound helpful. Old women in tech don't survive this long by sounding angry. I sent it. 3 minutes later, I got the reply. We've got this, Rachel. The smiley face hit harder than the words. It wasn't just dismissive, it was cute. It was the tone you use when your aunt tries to help you set up your iPhone and you want her to shut up politely. I stared at the message for a long time, hovered over the delete button. Then I did what I've done for the last 11 years when something like this landed in my inbox. I opened my personal archive, snapped a screenshot of the full exchange, tagged it Bridge Server to May Risk, and logged it under the 2025 Q2 folder. Not because I planned on using it, but because I'd learned that when things go sideways in a room full of pitch deck optimists, receipts are the only things that hold weight. By lunch, Harper had posted a Slack update cheerfully titled Bridge Sunset Locked In. 32 emojis followed. I didn't respond. I just looked over at the large format printer humming quietly in the corner of my office and wondered if it still had ink. Then I turned back to my notebook and shaded in another corner of the dependency map. Somewhere out in the glow of investor confidence and Slack applause, a $25 million disaster was stretching its arms and preparing to wake up. And I'd already started its obituary. Demo day had the manic energy of a high school play staged with VC money, catered lunch, branded notebooks no one would use, and just enough faux grit in the presentation titles to make it feel like innovation was happening. Operation Skybridge, Harper called it. The name was printed in bold font across the top of every screen in the auditorium, with a little cloud icon that looked like something pulled from a kid's weather app. I wasn't on the agenda. I was asked to observe and support, which is executive code for sit quietly and pretend you're part of this. My name didn't even make it to the printed handouts. Not that I expected it to. Harper had spent the last 2 months rebranding my work with new buzzwords and pastel slide transitions, spinning complex infrastructure into bite-sized slogans. She took the stage in heels that clicked like a metronome of confidence and launched into her speech. We are redefining our digital DNA, she said, voice bright and rehearsed. Moving from a legacy-bound environment to a dynamic cloud-native architecture that scales with our ambition. I'd spent the last decade writing the DNA she was now rewriting without knowing the genome. Half the diagrams in her slides were Frankenstein screenshots from internal wikis she didn't even have access to 6 weeks ago. Her next-gen design was, generously, 30% mine, 40% misinterpretation, and 30% wishful thinking cooked up during a WeWork brainstorm. Still, the investors nodded. They always nod, especially when you show graphs with upward arrows and say disruption enough times. She walked them through the modernized pipeline with the confidence of someone who thinks Git is just short for get it. Systems A through D were already migrated, she claimed. The reality? Systems B and C were still mid-sync and flagging checksum mismatches daily. System D hadn't even passed compliance for cloud transition yet, and System A was the one they'd be asking about in about 5 minutes. I sat near the back, pen in hand, notebook on my lap, looking like the company historian no one asked for. I'd been asked not to bring up old frameworks in front of the syndicate. It might confuse the narrative. God forbid the narrative include reality. Then it happened. Slide 19. A pie chart showing data assurance layers. Someone in the middle row, a silver-haired man with a pocket square and the kind of eyes that said he'd built real systems before investing in them, raised his hand. How are you managing secure archival sync between on-prem and cloud during the interim phase? The room tightened by a degree. Harper smiled wide. Too wide. Great question. Our hybrid phase is short-lived, so we're minimizing complexity by reducing dependency points. A non-answer. Right? But during that phase, how is consistency validated, especially for backlogged archival packets? She blinked. The smile wavered. We've automated checksum parity, I believe. That's not a thing. She looked toward her lead engineer. He suddenly found something very interesting on his iPad. I felt my mouth open. My lips shaped the first syllable of a sentence that might have saved her from total embarrassment, might have clarified the sync protocol, the timestamp issues, the bridge dependency she was pretending didn't exist. Then I stopped, let her flounder, let them see it. I closed my mouth, tucked my pen behind my ear, and crossed my legs. Someone from finance scribbled something on a pad. The investor thanked her, no longer nodding. Harper moved on, voice a little tighter, eyes avoiding the middle row. She skipped 2 slides ahead, said something about zero trust environments with the same conviction someone might say abracadabra, and the show continued. But the room had changed. Not enough to collapse the narrative. Not yet, but enough to splinter it. I didn't smile, I didn't shake my head, I just reached for the corner of my notebook, flipped to a new page, and began sketching a slightly different kind of map. Not for the system, for the reckoning. It started with a whisper. Not a bang, not a siren, just the quiet sigh of a background process that didn't complete, followed by a log file that stopped updating at 2:07 a.m. like a heart that forgot its next beat. System 2A's migration job stalled midway through a sync. I watched it happen in the background of a status dashboard no one else remembered to monitor. Archive packets that should have cleared were stuck mid-transfer, retrying themselves into a digital coma. A checksum error blinked 3 times and vanished. Auto-cleared by the new pipeline script Harper's team insisted was more efficient. I didn't say anything. The next morning, a junior engineer from the West Coast office filed a JIRA ticket titled "Archive Stuck, Unsure." It sat open for 4 hours before being flagged low priority. By then, logs had rolled over and the error trail was gone, a ghost in the pipeline. By Friday, the errors had multiplied like spores. System 3B attempted to write to a node that no longer existed. No alert went out. The auto-scaling function failed to initialize. A batch job wrote to a directory it didn't have access to, failed silently, and was marked successful by the monitoring tool Harper's new vendor had slapped on top of our stack like a glitter sticker on a pressure valve. I documented every failure: time, path, function, impact. I did it manually, 1 line at a time in the back half of my notebook, next to hand-drawn diagrams of the original architecture they never bothered to learn. I made no announcements. I sent no emails. Every page I filled was a page of rope they could hang themselves with. Then, one afternoon, it happened. A panicked ping from an integration team 2 floors down. "Need help. Job rollback failing on Alpha Archive. Rachel, are you online?" I clicked in. 10 minutes. That's all it took. I traced the failure to a broken symbolic link, patched the config manually, restarted the job, and routed the sync through a temporary fallback node I'd left behind just in case. They hadn't even known it existed. "Fixed," I typed. "Please close the ticket." I didn't log the fix through Harper's official channel. I didn't mark it in their pretty dashboard. It never happened, as far as they're concerned. Just another moment where legacy code got lucky. That night, I stayed late in the server room. No one else visits it anymore. It's been half converted into a storage space for branded umbrellas and leftover demo swag. But the humming of the old systems still soothed me, like the heartbeat of something real. I flipped through my notebook until I found the page I was looking for, the one labeled domino points. I added a new line. Alpha Archive link, failed silently, May 12th, restored manually. I paused, then underlined silently. That was the real danger. Not the bugs, not even the breakdowns. It was the silence. No alarms, no awareness. They were flying blind, guided by confidence and canvas slides, stripping out the very systems designed to scream when something went wrong. And I wasn't going to save them from that, not unless they asked. I capped my pen, tucked the notebook under my arm, and killed the light. Let it fail. I had time. And a front row seat. It happened at 2:41 p.m. on a Wednesday, exactly when no one was paying attention. A hotfix script, pushed live without proper review, bypassed the sync lockout, and executed a merge on archival queues that weren't done syncing. 2 enterprise clients, Fortwell Analytics and Madeira Logistics, watched as a decade's worth of time-stamped compliance records turned into garbage strings, data gone, metadata corrupted, recovery window narrowing by the second. At first, the Slack channels stayed quiet. It's always quiet in the beginning, when people still think the logs are just lagging, or maybe the API is misbehaving. But then come the pings, the confused ones, then the panicked ones. "Hey, at Infra, anyone else seeing weird hash mismatches on archive reads? Why is Fortwell's record tree returning nulls? Rachel, were you looped into the latest script push?" I didn't answer. My desk sat at the far end of the floor, a place no one visited unless something was already broken and dying. I heard the tension rising in snippets. Hushed calls, the rustling of someone sprinting down the hallway, a voice cracking with that strained calm people use when they're trying not to admit they're screwed. Harper emerged from her glass-walled office looking flushed and loud. "It's the legacy sink," she announced to no one in particular. "I told them we needed to sunset it earlier. It's not compatible with our modern stack." There it was. Legacy, her favorite scapegoat. Not the fact that her team ignored the sync status flags. Not the fact that the bridge server she insisted was obsolete had handled those sync validations automatically until she shut it down. Not the fact that I warned her. I turned back to my terminal. No one asked for my help. That suited me fine. Instead, I opened the folder marked Infra Schematic REV2, clicked print, and sent the full dependency map to the large format printer down the hall. 32 inches wide. Annotations in red. Every service and subservice in play. Every sequence that should have protected us. Every failsafe she disabled. The printer hummed to life like an old friend stretching its back. I waited for the last sheet to feed out, then rolled it carefully, creased once for my bag, and slid it inside. No message, no note, no escalation ticket, just a map. In case someone finally decided they wanted to see the wreckage before they drowned in it. Outside my door, I heard someone mutter, "Harper's saying it's an encryption bug." Of course she was. Blame the encryption. Blame the age of the system. Blame the calendar year. Mercury in retrograde, the wind. Anything but the decision to decouple safety nets from automation without understanding what those nets were even catching. I looked down at my screen and watched a new alert flicker to life. Archival node access timeout, Fortwell. Another. Client sync checksum mismatch, Madeira. Another. I muted the notification center. I'd already seen enough. Instead, I opened my notebook to the page labeled Trigger Events and added today's date. Underneath, I wrote one line in black ink. Integrity breach via unauthorized push. System unsalvageable without rollback plus data cert intervention. Then I drew a line beneath it. Not to separate the event from the others. To mark the beginning of collapse. Calm is easy when you already know how the fire started. Steel comes when you're the only one holding the blueprint that proves who lit the match. The invite came through with all the urgency of an afterthought. Optional tech sync, system health overview, Friday 10:02 a.m., Zoom. No subject line panic, no all caps emergency, no red flags. Just a quiet ping from Taylor and Gwen, the lead investor from Ridgeline Capital. That was the first sign. Taylor didn't do optional. If he called a meeting, especially one where he specified executive team plus technical overview, it wasn't curiosity. It was blood in the water. Harper forwarded the invite with a single line. "Let's show them the exciting progress. Rachel, feel free to sit in for legacy context if needed." Legacy context. I replied with a thumbs up emoji, then blocked my calendar. Friday arrived with a passive-aggressive brightness. Everyone joined early. Harper looked polished, poised, and already mid-laugh about something trivial when I logged in. Her voice filtered through my earbuds with that polished PR glaze she'd been perfecting for months. On either side of her sat her newly acquired lieutenants, people with titles like Cloud Delivery Evangelist and Transformation Lead. Not one of them had seen the server logs from last week. Taylor appeared last. No background blur, just a plain office, clean shelves, and a single folder on the desk behind him labeled Migration Logs. His voice was calm, pleasant. "Thanks for joining, everyone. We've been reviewing telemetry for the last few weeks. Nothing major, just wanted to understand some of the architecture decisions behind the recent uptick in latency." Harper beamed. "Of course, happy to walk through that. We've been pushing aggressively into phase 2. Sometimes a little friction is just a sign of momentum, you know?" Taylor smiled, almost like he believed that. "Let's start with something simple," he said. "System A was decommissioned last week, yes?" Harper nodded. "That's right. Part of our redundancy cleanup, the legacy bridge node no longer needed. And System B is still operational?" She nodded again, slower this time. "Yes. It's one of our core archive queues." Taylor leaned forward slightly. "Then can someone explain how System B is still functioning when the service it's dependent on, System A, no longer exists?" Silence. I didn't move. Just watch the live tension ooze into every mic buffer and facial expression like water finding the cracks. Harper opened her mouth, closed it, turned slightly to the left as if one of her lieutenants might suddenly remember something brilliant. One of them cleared his throat and said, "I think that's..." Probably handled in the container orchestration layer. We've abstracted a lot of the old dependencies. Taylor didn't blink. We pulled the logs. Another pause. Calls to System B are still routing through deprecated pathways. There's a dead reference that shouldn't resolve, yet somehow still does. We flagged 42 instances last week. I watched Harper's face drain just a touch of color, like someone realizing they've been caught bluffing with a handful of napkins. I didn't speak. Didn't offer to explain, didn't point out that System A had contained a low-level relay protocol that wasn't documented in their cloud migration plan, and that System B only stayed online because I'd quietly rerouted traffic through a ghost node I'd spun up to prevent total failure. Instead, I watched, because this wasn't my trap. This was theirs. Taylor turned toward me, first time he acknowledged I was even in the call. "Rachel," he said casually, "you've been with the system the longest. Does this surprise you?" I met his gaze, steady. "No," I said. "It tracks." I didn't elaborate, didn't rescue, just let the words settle. On the far end of the call, someone exhaled hard through their nose. Taylor sat back and smiled. "Interesting," he said. I closed my notebook without writing a word, because I didn't need to. They'd just stepped on the first tripwire, and the next one was already ticking. There was a moment, right after Taylor said interesting, and right before Harper started speaking again, where the entire call hung in suspension, like a breath that didn't know whether to come out as a laugh or a scream. Her jaw twitched. One of the evangelists reached for a coffee mug that wasn't there, and I sat still, waiting. Taylor nodded once, slowly, then tapped his pen against the edge of his screen. "Let's dig into this dead reference issue a bit more. I'm curious how the cascade was supposed to be managed when A went offline, but B still needed the call." Harper blinked. We had scoped the call routing through the new cloud abstraction layer. I believe the bridge path was deprecated in that rollout. "You believe," he repeated, not mocking, just patient. Then he looked directly at me again. "Rachel, could you walk us through what the original dependency looked like? I want to understand if this was ever part of the mapped plan or if this is an unexpected behavior." This was the moment, the one I hadn't planned for, but had always quietly expected. I reached beside me, opened the battered brown notebook I carried every day, and unfolded the center trifold. It made a soft shh sound, the paper already worn thin at the creases. 32 inches of chaos, inked in black and red, lines crisscrossing like a metro map for maniacs. At first glance, it looked like nonsense, but I'd spent months on it, layering each integration point, flagging risk nodes in red, drawing timestamp ranges, noting approval states. I tilted the webcam down. "This," I said, "is the full dependency path for systems A through F. You'll see the archive relay, here, was never decoupled from system A. There's no alternate service handoff. It was flagged as a risk node 18 months ago." I flipped the page gently. Taylor leaned in. Across the next sheet, written in clean block letters, was a note dated 18 months prior. "Pending approval, phased decoupling protocol. Requires bridge handoff and sync verification pre-removal." Harper went still. Taylor didn't speak. He just stared. One of the other investors, a woman I didn't recognize, leaned forward and squinted. "That's your handwriting?" "Yes." "And this protocol, was it ever approved?" "No," I said. "The proposal was submitted twice. It was marked not a priority both times." A long beat. Then Taylor clicked something off screen. "Can you email me a scan of that map and any documentation that supports these notes?" "I can send it now," I said, "or I can have a certified copy delivered with timestamps, whichever you prefer." "Do both," he said. No one else was speaking now. Harper shifted in her chair, then tried to recover with a laugh. "I mean, obviously we're all on the same team here. Rachel, you should have spoken up sooner if you knew this was going to become a thing." I didn't look at her. I looked at Taylor. "If I'd spoken up," I said, "you wouldn't have asked to see this." He nodded once, the kind of nod that carries weight, and the room changed. Not dramatically, not with gasps or shouting, but you could feel it. Attention shifted, focus shifted. One by one, the investors turned toward me, not Harper, and waited for what I would say next. And I said nothing. I just closed the notebook as gently as I had opened it and slid it aside. The room had the answers now. They could catch up. I'd waited 18 months. I could wait a few minutes more. By Monday, the tone had shifted like weather dropping 30 degrees overnight. The weekly ops meeting, normally a breeze of updates and buzzwords, had a new guest list. Taylor was back, this time with two technical advisors from Ridgeline. Not PR types, not evangelists, engineers, the kind who wore unbranded hoodies and took notes with actual pens. The kind who noticed when you tried to bullshit a dependency tree. Harper opened the call with her usual brightness, but it didn't land. The air had changed. No one interrupted her, but no one smiled either. After 3 slides, Taylor raised a hand, not to stop her, but to redirect. "Rachel," he said, "can we go back to the sync bridge issue, specifically the integrity pathway between legacy nodes and the new object store?" Harper's mouth stayed open for a beat too long. I reached for my notebook. "Certainly. Page 5 of the doc I sent Friday contains the transition handshake overview, but we can walk through it live." They let me talk. No interruptions, no eye rolls, just questions. Serious ones. What happens if Node 4C is removed before 5A completes? What's the window between TTL expiration and archive loss? Are those risks still live? Yes, I answered, unless the migration sequence is halted or restructured with updated integrity checks. Harper tried to cut in. "Well, obviously we'll want Rachel's input going forward, now that the legacy data is becoming more of a factor." But Taylor didn't turn toward her. He turned to the founder, whose square jaw had been clenched tighter each minute. "We'd like to request a freeze," Taylor said calmly, "and all cloud transition efforts paused until a full system audit is conducted. Rachel will lead that audit. Her documentation appears to be the only source of truth." The founder blinked. "You're asking us to, what? Pause the rollout?" "No," Taylor said. "We're telling you." A silence settled, thick and final. By that afternoon, a board memo was circulated. Immediate migration freeze, pending architectural review. And just like that, Harper was gone from the front lines. No dramatic firing, no tantrum, just gone. A quiet reassignment to external partnerships, per the email. The kind of exile disguised as a pivot. At 4:15 p.m., I got a knock at my door. The founder, grayer than I remembered, stood in my office doorway like he used to back when this company still ran on Linux scripts and Mountain Dew. "Got a minute?" I nodded, didn't rise. He closed the door, walked in slowly, and took the guest chair across from me like it still belonged to someone else. "I was wrong," he said. "About a lot." I didn't answer. I waited. "We need stability," he continued, "and we need the investors calm. You built the only thing in this building anyone still trusts. Will you consider taking a more public role again? Something visible. Lead architect, officially." I reached for my bag, pulled out a sealed envelope, and slid it across the table. Inside, an updated architecture plan, revised sequencing, timeline recommendations, updated risk flags, every system drawn clean, colored, annotated with transition buffers built in. He didn't open it. He just stared at it like it might bite him. "You already drew it up." I met his eyes. I never stopped. He nodded. Quiet. Respectful this time. No pitch, no sell, just a man finally realizing who was holding the actual map. When he stood to leave, he hesitated by the door. "We lost our way," he said. "But you didn't." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because I hadn't lost my way. They just finally looked down and realized I'd been drawing the path the entire time. 3 weeks later, they held another strategy session, but this one felt different. No champagne, no ambient jazz playlist curated by Harper's assistant, no Canva animations flipping past at breakneck speed, just real chairs, real printouts, and a room that remembered how to be quiet. Harper wasn't there. Officially, she'd been reassigned to external partnerships, a phrase so bland it might as well have been printed on a condolence card. Unofficially, everyone knew she'd been walked sideways out of the room she was never ready to sit in. No drama, no statement, just gone. In her place sat people who had finally stopped pretending to understand systems they never built. The air had changed. The posture of the room had changed. And on the back wall of the new CTO's office, clean, level, perfectly lit, hung a framed print of my dependency map. The one they'd laughed at, the one Harper called a legacy scribble. It had been professionally scanned and enlarged. The new label underneath read, Stack Integrity, Rev 3, R. Pierce. I never asked for that, didn't need it, but it was there. Midway through the investor recap call, Taylor cleared his throat and leaned forward in his chair. The Zoom tile flashed full screen on the main monitor, and he said, "We've seen significant improvements in stability, latency, and rollback prevention. Credit where it's due." He paused just long enough for the moment to settle. "Let's hear from the person who understands this stack." I didn't smile, didn't preen, just nodded once and clicked share screen. The deck wasn't flashy, just architecture slides, audit outcomes, phased roadmap adjustments, annotated buffer windows, built for clarity, not applause. Halfway through, I switched to the live dashboard and walked them through a successful sync run that had completed hours earlier. No dropped packets, no silent errors, no skipped validation. Just clean, boring stability. The best kind of success is the kind no one notices until it's already happened. When I finished, there was a long pause. Not awkward, just full. Then Taylor said, "This is the first time I've understood how the entire system actually works. Thank you." Someone else on the call murmured, "About time." I ended screen share, closed the deck, no pitch, no fanfare, just facts. And the facts had finally spoken louder than the noise. After the call, the founder sent me a one-line email. "You saved us without saying a word." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, not because I needed to be cold, but because silence had always been my sharpest tool. They'd ignored my voice for a year, then they built their future on my notebook. I never raised it, never reminded them. They did that themselves. Every time they looked at the map on the wall and realized the name beneath it wasn't theirs.